They found her footprints before they ever found her face. Small, uneven steps pressed into the desert's dust, as if every stride was a fight against the ground itself. Some said the desert would claim her before morning. It was the kind of place that swallowed the weak, where the wind didn't just blow, it scraped. But fate has a strange way of bending when someone chooses kindness over fear. That someone was a rancher named Eli Mercer, a man who lived quiet, far from town, with nothing but the hum of crickets and the groan of his old wooden porch to keep him company. He didn't go looking for her. He never expected to cross paths with a girl whose eyes carried storms and shadows. But that day, the world shifted, and his life, like hers, was about to be rewritten by a single act of shelter. The land around Eli's ranch stretched for miles, a raw canvas of gold and dust. The summer sun pressed down like a heavy hand, baking the earth until it cracked open in thin lines. Every breath tasted of sand and heat. Out here, silence wasn't just quiet, it had weight, like the world was holding its breath. Eli's ranch sat on the edge of nowhere. The fences were weathered, leaning against the wind as if tired of standing. The barn creaked with every gust, its red paint long faded to a dull brown. Cattle moved slowly in the distance, their shadows long and thin against the dying grass. Nights brought little relief. The air cooled, but the stillness carried a lonely kind of chill. Coyotes howled across the plains, their voices sharp and hollow under the stars. Eli often sat on his porch during these nights, staring at the horizon as if waiting for something to happen, a sound, a figure, a reason. But life rarely changed here. The town was a half-day ride away, and people in town hardly rode out this far. It was a place meant for men who wanted to be left alone. Eli thought he was one of those men. He didn't know that the desert was about to bring someone to his door who would test every wall he had built around himself. Eli Mercer was 43 years old, though the years had carved deeper lines into his face than most men his age. His skin carried the burn of too many summers, and his hands were rough, marked by rope burns and calluses that told the story of a life spent working the land. He wasn't the kind of man who spoke much, but when he did, people listened. Not because his voice was loud, but because it carried a quiet weight, like someone who'd seen too much and learned to keep his truths close. He lived alone, not by choice, but because life had a way of taking things from him. His wife had passed 5 winters ago, leaving the house quieter than he could stand. They never had children. Now, the ranch was all he had, fences to mend, cattle to herd, and memories he couldn't quite put down. Eli wasn't a cruel man, but he was guarded. Folks in town often said he had a look in his eyes, like a man still waiting for something he'd lost years ago. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was waiting, though even he didn't know for what. Every morning, he rose with the sun, fed the horses, and rode the pastures, following the same paths day after day. Nothing ever changed. But that was before the day he saw those footprints in the dust, small, stumbling tracks that would lead him to a girl who would change everything. It was late afternoon when Eli first noticed the footprints. He had been riding the edge of his property, checking the fence line after a storm had swept through the night before. The ground was soft from the rare rain, and there they were, prints too small for a grown man, too unsteady to belong to a cowboy. He stopped his horse, squinting at the trail. They led toward the dry creek bed, where the earth cracked like broken glass. He followed them without thinking, the leather of his saddle creaking with each slow step. Something about the tracks stirred a knot in his chest. They weren't just wandering prints. They were desperate, like someone running from something or someone. Half an hour later, he found her. She was curled beneath a dead mesquite tree, knees drawn tight, her head lowered like she was bracing for the world to break apart. Her clothes were torn, caked with dirt, and her hair was tangled with bits of grass. For a moment, Eli just sat there on his horse, unsure what to say. She looked up, eyes dark and sharp, as if she expected him to hurt her. There was no trust in her stare, only fear. Eli dismounted slowly, his hands open, showing her he carried no harm. "You all right, miss?" he asked, his voice low and steady. She didn't answer. Her lips trembled, but no words came. Eli didn't press her. Instead, he took off his coat and placed it near her feet. "It's a long walk out here. You'll freeze come nightfall," he said, his tone softer now. After a long pause, she reached for the coat, not taking her eyes off him. That tiny gesture was enough. Without another word, Eli knew he couldn't leave her there. Not in this desert. Eli didn't ask questions on the ride back. The girl sat behind him on the saddle, small and rigid, clutching the back of his coat like it was the only solid thing in her world. Every time the horse jolted, he could feel how light she was, too light, like someone who hadn't eaten for days. When they reached the ranch, she hesitated at the porch steps, her bare feet tracing the wooden boards as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to cross. Eli didn't say anything. He just pushed the door open and gestured for her to come inside. She stood there for a long moment, her eyes flicking around the room. The old wooden table, the iron stove, the faded photographs on the wall. It was all strange to her. Finally, she stepped inside, her movements quiet as if afraid of breaking something. Eli fixed her a plate of cornbread and beans, simple food, but it was all he had. He placed the plate in front of her, then sat down across the table without a word. For a moment, she just stared at the food, as though she didn't trust it. Then, slowly, she picked up the bread and took a bite. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was steady, like two people learning to breathe in the same space. Eli watched her eat, not with pity, but with the kind of respect you give someone who's survived something hard. In that silence, something shifted. Neither of them spoke, but something like trust began to take root. By the third day, word had already reached town. A rider passing the ranch had spotted a girl on Eli's porch, dark-haired and quiet, and that was enough to spark talk. In a place where nothing much happened, gossip traveled faster than the wind. When Eli rode into town for supplies, the stares followed him. Men leaning against the saloon rail paused mid-conversation. Women on the boardwalk stopped arranging their baskets to whisper behind their hands. Mercer's got himself a squaw. Someone muttered loud enough for him to hear. "Ain't right, bringing one of them here." Eli kept his head low and didn't answer. He had never cared much for other people's opinions, but this time the words stung. Not for him, but for her. She'd already endured enough. At the general store, old Hank behind the counter gave him a hard look. "Eli," Hank said, "you know folks are talking. They think trouble follows people like her." Eli's jaw tightened. "She's just a girl, Hank. Ain't no trouble in that." "Maybe not," Hank sighed, "but you know how some folks are. They don't need much reason to bring out a rope and fire." Eli didn't answer. He just took the sack of flour and coffee beans, paid his due, and left. As he mounted his horse, he felt the weight of every eye on his back. That night, when he returned home, the girl was sitting on the porch steps, watching the horizon. She didn't ask what the town said. Maybe she already knew. On the fifth day, trouble came riding in. Eli saw them before they reached the ranch. 3 men on horseback, their hats low, their coats dusty from the trail. The way they rode, tight and slow, told him they weren't passing through. They were coming for something. He stepped off the porch, hands resting loosely at his sides, waiting. The men stopped a few yards from the fence, their horses snorting in the heat. The one in the middle, broad-shouldered and mean-eyed, spoke first. "You got something don't belong to you, Mercer," the man said, his voice rough like gravel. Eli didn't flinch. "Don't know what you're talking about." The man smirked. "Girl, small, dark hair. Belongs to us." He spat on the ground, leaning forward in his saddle. "Ain't wise to keep her here. Folks might think you're on her side." Eli's gaze hardened, but his voice stayed calm. "She don't belong to anyone. Not me. Not you." One of the riders laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "We could take her off your hands. Save you the trouble." Eli shook his head once. "Ain't gonna happen." The middleman's face darkened, his hand drifting to the grip of his revolver. "You really want to make this your fight, Mercer?" Eli's hand hovered near his own holster, but he didn't draw. "If that's what it takes." The air between them tightened, heavy as a drawn bowstring. For a moment, no one moved. Then the leader gave a short, sharp whistle. The men turned their horses, riding off with slow, deliberate steps, like a promise. Eli stood there, watching them vanish in the dust. He knew this wasn't over. That night, he checked every lock, every rifle, and made sure the girl was safe inside. The girl had seen fear before. It showed in the way her hands trembled when a horse neighed too close or when footsteps approached the porch at night. But something changed after the men left that day. Instead of shrinking, she grew sharper, her eyes steady like she was done being hunted. Eli noticed it when he found her in the barn that evening. She was holding one of his old rifles, testing its weight, her small fingers clumsy but determined. He stepped in quietly, not wanting to startle her. "You ever used one of those?" he asked. She shook her head, but didn't put it down. "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I can learn." There was a resolve in her tone that surprised him. She wasn't asking for protection. She wanted a chance to stand her ground. Eli nodded slowly. "All right," he said, taking the rifle from her hands and showing her how to hold it. "You start with the weight, the balance. Ain't just about shooting, it's about breathing, steady and slow." The girl listened carefully, her dark eyes fixed on his every move. For the first time, Eli saw something beyond fear in her, strength. A quiet kind of fire that had been buried under days of running and hiding. By sunset, she was standing straighter, her hands firm on stock. She didn't smile, but she didn't look broken anymore. And in that moment, Eli realized something. This girl wasn't just surviving. She was ready to fight for her place in this world. The men returned on the 7th day, but this time, they weren't alone. A small group of riders appeared on the horizon. Different faces, painted horses, moving with the rhythm of the earth. Eli recognized them instantly. A native tribe. The first 3 men, those who had threatened Eli, rode in fast, guns strapped to their belts, but the tribe moved slower, like they didn't need speed to carry power. The girl stood on the porch, her hands gripping the railing, eyes wide but unafraid. The leader of the rough men shouted, "We warned you, Mercer. That girl's theirs, and she don't belong here." But the tribe's chief, an older man with deep-set eyes and feathers in his hair, said nothing at first. He rode forward, calm, his gaze resting on the girl. She gasped softly, her lips forming a word Eli didn't understand. "Family." The chief turned his eyes on Eli, and there was something unspoken between them, a gratitude, a recognition. Then he faced the armed men. "She is ours," the chief said, his voice like stone. "But she is safe because of him." The rough men shifted uneasily, but one reached for his gun. That's when a girl stepped forward. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice strong, shaking in the open air. It was the first time Eli had heard her speak with such force. Eli's hand hovered near his holster, ready. But it was the tribe that moved first, bows drawn, arrows ready, silent but deadly. The air was so thick with tension, it felt like the world might split. Finally, the rough men backed off, muttering curses as they turned their horses. The tribe didn't move until they disappeared into the dust. The girl turned to Eli, tears in her eyes, not of fear, but of relief. After the men rode off, the land felt quiet again, too quiet, as if even the wind was holding its breath. The tribe dismounted, and the girl ran into their arms. An older woman wrapped her in a blanket, whispering words in a language Eli didn't understand. But he didn't need to. He could see the relief, the warmth, the family she had longed for. The tribe's chief approached Eli, his footsteps slow but certain. "You kept her safe," he said, his voice deep and steady. "For that, you have our respect and our friendship." Eli nodded, unsure how to respond. She needed shelter. That's all. But the chief shook his head. "It was more than that. You gave her hope." By the next day, word had spread through town again. This time, there were no whispers of hate. People who had once judged Eli now watched from a distance, their curiosity mixed with something new, respect, maybe even shame. The men who had threatened him were gone, and no one dared to speak against him or the girl anymore. That evening, the tribe stayed near the ranch, sharing a meal over the fire. The girl sat beside Eli, no longer timid or silent. She smiled, just a small, fleeting smile, but it felt like the first true light breaking over the horizon. Eli realized then that both of them had changed in those 7 days. She had found her family, but he had found something, too, a piece of himself he thought was gone. The next morning, the ranch didn't feel the same. It wasn't just Eli's place anymore. The tribe had stayed overnight, their horses grazing quietly by the outer fence, their campfires leaving a faint smell of smoke that mixed with the cool dawn air. For once, the silence didn't feel lonely, it felt alive. The girl, dressed now in clean clothes given by the tribe, moved through the yard with a different spirit. She no longer walked with her head down. She carried herself with quiet confidence, like someone who had been found. Eli watched her from the porch, sipping his coffee, and for the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him, a warmth that went beyond gratitude. Later that day, the tribe invited him to join a meal, cooked over an open flame with herbs and roots Eli had never tasted before. He sat among them, listening to their stories, their laughter, the soft hum of songs that seemed older than the desert itself. The girl sat close by, her eyes shining in the firelight, translating pieces of the stories for him. Eli didn't say much, but when their chief placed a hand on his shoulder, he understood something without words. He wasn't an outsider anymore. By offering the girl shelter, he had built a bridge between his lonely world and theirs. That night, as the stars burned bright above the ranch, Eli felt something he hadn't felt in years, belonging. Before the tribe left, the girl came to the porch where Eli stood. In her hands, she carried a small beaded charm, its colors bright against the faded wood. She held it out to him, her eyes steady. "For you," she said softly. "To remember." Eli took it, feeling the rough edges of the beads against his palm. He wasn't a man of many words, but this time he found them. "I won't forget," he replied. The tribe rode out at sunrise, their silhouettes blending with the endless horizon. The girl turned back once, her smile faint but certain, like she knew she'd left a piece of her strength with him. Later that day, Eli walked to the fence line where he had first found her footprints. He tied the beaded charm to one of the old posts. It swayed gently in the breeze, catching the sun with every shift of the wind. For a long time, he stood there, watching the desert. It no longer felt empty. It felt like a place where lives had crossed, where kindness had taken root. And in that quiet, he understood, sometimes saving someone ends up saving you too. Kindness is a strange thing. It doesn't ask for permission, and it doesn't wait for the right moment. It just happens quietly, like a seed carried by the wind, finding a place to grow when no one expects it. Eli Mercer didn't set out to change anyone's life. He was just a man trying to get through another lonely day. But when he opened his door to that lost girl, he opened something inside himself too. In 7 days, the walls around his heart softened, and in their place grew something stronger. Connection, trust, and a bond that no fear or prejudice could break. The desert is harsh, unforgiving. It breaks most men, but sometimes in its silence, it reminds you of what truly matters. And as Eli looked out across those endless golden fields, he knew one truth for sure. No act of kindness is ever small.